If you walk into your bathroom right now, open your medicine cabinet and pull out a bottle of prescription medication. Say it costs you or your insurance company $500. You probably assume you know what you're paying for, right?
Yeah, you look at that tiny little capsule and just assume, the cost is all the science.
Exactly. There's this implicit understanding that the journey it took to get from a scientist's microscope through years of clinical trials and finally into your hand was astonishingly long and incredibly expensive.
Right. We picture the vast laboratories, the cutting-edge chemistry, the brilliant scientists in white coats.
We all know pharmaceutical companies spend billions on R&D, but the truth of the matter, up to 30% of that price tag isn't paying for the science at all. It's paying for the marketing to convince your doctor to prescribe it.
I mean, it is one of the most counterintuitive realities of the entire life sciences industry.
Yeah.
We hold on to this romanticized vision of the vast majority of capital going into, like, beakers and clinical trials.
Which makes sense, logically.
It does. But the machinery required to actually commercialize a drug, to navigate the labyrinth of global regulations, to monitor its safety across millions of patients, and to actually get physicians to prescribe it over a competitor's drug, that machinery is staggeringly costly.
So the chemistry is just the start.
Yeah, the actual chemistry is often just the opening act. The business of selling the chemistry is the real financial heavyweight.
And that brings us to the subject of today's deep dive. We are putting the spotlight on a company called Indegene Limited. The ticker is INDGN. Now, unless you work in the upper echelons of a global pharmaceutical company, you've probably never heard of them.
No, and that is entirely by design. Indegene is a technology-led digital commercialization partner, and they operate exclusively in the life sciences space.
They're essentially the invisible digital engine running quietly in the background for the biggest names in the business, right?
Exactly. And our goal today is to unpack how Indegene has managed to position itself as the critical infrastructure for the world's top 20 biopharma companies.
Right, because we're going to look at how they take incredibly messy, highly regulated clinical data and convert it into streamlined, automated operations.
And crucially, we need to understand why they currently hold what is essentially a near monopoly position in the listed space.
To do that, we are pulling from a stack of sources that cover the entire landscape of Indegene's operations. We're looking at their specific business model, the proprietary AI technology they've built, and the fascinating regulatory tailwinds pushing their growth right now.
Yeah, including some very recent U.S. legislation from July 2025.
And of course, we are going to dig into the financial realities of scaling a niche, debt-free tech powerhouse. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the actual mechanics of what Indegene does, because to understand their value, we first have to understand the specific, highly regulated problems they're solving for these pharmaceutical giants.
Well, you can't just slap a generic software solution onto a pharma company.
No, definitely not. You really can't.
The problems in the life sciences sector are uniquely complex, and they're heavily burdened by compliance. Indegene's revenue is overwhelmingly driven by biopharma companies. About 89.5% of their revenue comes from that specific group.
And the remaining fraction is just biotech and medical device companies, right?
Yeah, exactly. To tackle this, they've essentially broken down the commercialization of a drug into 4 distinct pillars, providing an AI-driven platform to optimize every single stage.
Let's walk through those pillars, and let's not just list them. I want to actually visualize what this looks like on the ground. The biggest chunk of their business, contributing 59% of their revenue, is what they call enterprise commercial solutions.
Which encompasses digital marketing, sales strategy, and engagement with healthcare professionals, or HCPs.
Now, when I hear pharmaceutical sales strategy, I immediately picture a very specific scene from the 1990s or early 2000s. I picture an army of sales representatives wearing nice suits, physically driving their sedans from clinic to clinic.
Oh, the classic pharmaceutical rep.
Yeah. They sit in waiting rooms for an hour, hoping to get 5 minutes with a doctor between patient appointments. They do a rapid-fire pitch on the benefits of a new cholesterol drug, leave behind some glossy brochures, maybe a branded clipboard, and then drive to the next clinic. It sounds wildly inefficient.
The inefficiency of that traditional model is hard to overstate. It is highly localized, intensely manual, and nearly impossible to track in terms of actual return on investment.
I mean, how would you even measure it?
You couldn't, really. If a doctor writes a prescription 2 weeks after that sales rep visited, was it because of the rep? Or did they read a journal article? Or did they see a commercial on television?
The pharmaceutical company had no granular data.
None. Enterprise Commercial Solutions takes that deeply analog process and digitizes the entire foundation.
So my understanding of how this digitizes is that it's not just about, giving the sales rep an iPad instead of a clipboard. It's about creating a centralized intelligence system that dictates who that rep talks to and when.
That touches on the core mechanism perfectly. Indegene uses data analytics to build incredibly detailed profiles of healthcare professionals.
Oh, wow. So they know the doctor's habits.
Exactly. It understands exactly when and how a specific doctor prefers to consume medical information. Maybe Dr. Smith in Chicago ignores every email she gets, but she frequently attends virtual webinars on Friday afternoons.
Or maybe someone else prefers reading on their commute.
Right, maybe Dr. Patel in London prefers to read short, peer-reviewed study summaries on his tablet during his morning train ride. The platform ingests all this behavioral data and then delivers personalized, fully compliant content to them through their preferred digital channels.
That makes a lot of sense.
It ensures that when a sales rep does make contact, whether physically or virtually, they're armed with the exact data the physician actually cares about.
Okay, so that's the commercial side. You are replacing the shotgun approach of dropping off brochures with a highly targeted sniper approach using digital analytics. But then you have the second pillar, which makes up about 29% of their revenue enterprise medical solutions.
Yes, and this is a fascinating area.
It really is because it sounds incredibly administrative, regulatory submissions, complaint management, but the stakes are quite literally life and death. One of the major components here is drug safety monitoring, which the industry calls pharmacovigilance. Let's dig into that because I don't think most people realize what happens after a drug goes to market.
Pharmacovigilance is the perfect lens to view why this industry is so difficult to navigate. When a drug gets approved by the FDA or the EMA, the pharmaceutical company's responsibility doesn't end. In fact, a whole new phase of liability begins.
Right, because now millions of people are taking it.
Exactly. If a patient halfway across the world takes a newly approved cardiac drug and experiences an unexpected adverse reaction, say severe dizziness or a rash, the pharmaceutical company is legally obligated to capture that information.
And they can't just throw it in a filing cabinet.
No, they have to process it, categorize the severity, map it to specific medical dictionaries, and report it to regulatory bodies within very strict, non-negotiable timeframes.
And historically, how is that done? Because if I'm a doctor in Tokyo and I write a messy handwritten note in Japanese about my patient's rash and email a scanned PDF of that note to the local pharma representative, how does that turn into a structured data point in an FDA database?
Historically, it required an army of human beings.
Yeah.
Highly trained medical professionals, often doctors and nurses, would have to sit at desks reading through mountains of unstructured data.
It's just reading PDFs all day.
Yeah, we're talking about doctors' handwritten notes, emails, transcripts of phone calls to customer service centers, faxes.
Wait, faxes.
Oh yes, faxes are still widely used in healthcare. These humans would manually read the narrative, extract the relevant medical terms, translate them, and then manually type that data into complex, multi-page regulatory forms.
That sounds slow.
It is slow, it is prone to human error, and it is incredibly expensive to employ medical professionals to just do data entry.
Which sounds like an absolute nightmare of paperwork waiting to go wrong.
It is a systemic vulnerability. But Indegene's technical solution lies in their internally developed artificial intelligence and machine learning models. They use natural language processing, or NLP, specifically trained on life sciences lexicons.
So the AI reads the faxes.
Exactly. The AI ingests that messy, unstructured text, the scanned PDF from Tokyo, and it reads it. It identifies the relevant medical terms, flags the adverse event, determines the severity based on context, and automatically populates the required regulatory submissions in the correct format.
So the AI is essentially acting as a digital triage nurse, reading the messy reality of global healthcare and translating it into the rigid language of regulatory compliance. It takes the human error out of the equation and speeds up the processing time.
And it ensures compliance at a scale that human teams simply cannot match. When you are dealing with millions of patients taking a blockbuster drug globally, the volume of adverse event reports can be staggering. Automating this through enterprise medical solutions is a structural necessity for these top 20 pharma companies.
So we have the commercial marketing optimization and we have the medical regulatory compliance. Then there's the third pillar, which brings in about 12% of revenue, omni-channel activation solutions. This is described as the digital-first last mile promotion.
Right. If enterprise commercial solutions is the overarching strategy and the brain analyzing the data, omnichannel activation is the tactical execution. It is the muscle.
It actually delivers the message.
Yes. It ensures that the strategy is deployed seamlessly. Whether a doctor is attending a virtual webinar, checking their email, reading a peer-reviewed journal online, or interacting with a chatbot on a medical portal, the pharmaceutical company's message needs to be coordinated.
So they don't get spammed.
Exactly. Omnichannel ensures that the physician isn't bombarded with conflicting messages or redundant information across different touchpoints.
And the final piece, the remaining slice of the pie, is their enterprise clinical solutions and consultancy. This provides support for actual clinical trials and guides the overarching digital transformation for these companies. So when I look at all four of these pillars together, the marketing strategy, the safety monitoring, the omnichannel delivery, and the clinical trial support, the analogy that jumps to mind is that Indegene isn't just selling a software tool.
No, not at all.
They are acting as a highly specialized digital operating system for a pharma company. They are taking this incredibly heavy, paper-laden world and replacing it with an interconnected AI framework.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. And to fully grasp the value of this operating system, we have to look at who is actually sitting at the keyboard. Indegene isn't building consumer-facing apps. Patients aren't downloading Indegene software on their phones.
Right, it's not for us.
The end users are the internal marketing teams, the regulatory affairs officers, the clinical trial managers, and the safety monitoring teams within these enormous pharmaceutical corporations. Those internal employees are the ones relying on Indegene to navigate a landscape that is so thick with red tape it would paralyze a normal technology company.
And they're buying this operating system because the legacy costs of doing it the old analog way are eating them alive, which naturally leads us to the sheer scale of this problem. Let's talk about the math of the medicine cabinet.
The numbers are pretty wild.
Yeah. They really are. We know what Indegene does, but we need to look at the vast ocean they're swimming in and just how much room they have to grow, because the numbers we are pulling from our sources are almost hard to wrap your head around. The total addressable market, or TAM, for what Indegene does, is estimated at $100 billion. In Indian units, that translates to roughly 9 lakh crores rupees.
9 lakh crores rupees. It is a number so large it almost loses meaning until you break down how it is actually calculated. Global pharmaceutical companies typically spend 20 to 30% of their total top-line revenue purely on sales and marketing.
Wait, 20 to 30% just on marketing?
Yes. Think about the gravity of that. For every single dollar or rupee a pharmaceutical giant generates in revenue, up to 30% is spent just trying to sell the drug to physicians in healthcare systems.
And Indegene's entire value proposition is to walk into the boardroom of a Pfizer or a Novartis and say, we can use our AI platforms to slash that spend down to 12 to 15%. They are promising to literally cut the marketing budget in half while maintaining or even improving the reach and efficacy of the sales effort.
That is the pitch. And it is an incredibly compelling one, especially for legacy companies desperate to improve their margins.
Okay, but this is where I have to pause and push back on the narrative, because the math here is throwing me off. If the total addressable market is 9 lakh crores rupees, and the savings for the clients are so incredibly obvious, dropping their marketing spend by half, why is Indegene's current revenue only 3,500 crore rupees?
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, that means their current penetration rate is less than 4% of the market. Over 96% of this market remains entirely unserved. If I invent a machine that cuts your biggest expense in half, I would expect you to buy it immediately. Why isn't adoption happening at light speed?
You are touching on the exact friction point that defines the pharmaceutical industry. You simply cannot look at life sciences the way you look at consumer tech or even standard enterprise software.
Because it's too regulated.
Exactly. In consumer software, a superior product like a new messaging app or a better CRM can achieve global adoption in a matter of months. In pharma, you are dealing with a slow-moving, heavily regulated behemoth where extreme risk aversion is the default state of existence.
Because if you move fast and break things in consumer tech, people get a bug on their phone. If you move fast and break things in pharma, a safety report gets lost, patients are harmed, and the CEO is facing a federal inquiry.
The stakes completely alter the speed of business. Scaling in this environment takes decades of trust building. It is not just about having a flashy software launch and a good sales deck. You also have to consider the operational disruption of Indegene's hybrid revenue model.
How does that work?
They utilize a mix of a resource utilization model, where clients pay based on the time and effort of Indegene professionals embedded in their systems, and a fixed price or unitized billing model for specific deliverables. Transitioning a multinational pharma company from their legacy, paper-heavy systems to this new digital model requires uprooting entrenched corporate habits.
So it's not just a software installation, it's institutional change management.
Thoroughly. The client have to be willing to structurally change how their internal compliance teams, their marketing teams, and their legal departments operate. They have to rewrite their own internal standard operating procedures to accommodate the AI.
Wow, okay.
That kind of institutional shift moves at a glacial pace, even when the financial savings are staring them in the face.
So the 96% of the market that is unserved isn't actively rejecting Indegene. They are just caught in the inertia of their own bureaucratic gravity. They are taking years to approve the pilot programs, years to roll it out to a single department, and years more to deploy it globally.
Right. The runway for growth is enormous, but the speed of travel on that runway is strictly dictated by the comfort level of pharmaceutical compliance officers and legal teams.
Which brings us to the competitive landscape. If there is 96% of a 9 lakh crores rupees market sitting open and waiting to be claimed, competitors have to be circling. So why does Indegene have no listed peers in India, or globally for that matter, with the exact same model? How do they defend this territory against the tech giants?
To understand their moat, we have to look at three distinct advantages: technology, distribution, and switching costs. Let's start with the technology itself. Indegene isn't just taking an off-the-shelf AI, bolting a generic wrapper onto it, and selling it to pharma.
They built their own.
Yes. They have built a proprietary AI and Gen AI platform branded as NextXT, and they support this platform with a dedicated technology team of 650 members. This platform is built entirely and exclusively for life sciences.
So what does that actually mean in practice? My understanding is that if you ask a generalized AI to write a marketing email for a new car, it can do a great job. But if you ask a generalized AI to write a marketing email for a new oncology drug, it might hallucinate a medical claim that violates FDA guidelines.
That is the critical distinction. Generalized AI models are trained on the entire internet. The NextXT platform is trained specifically on life sciences, lexicons, regulatory frameworks, and historical clinical data.
So it knows the rules.
Exactly. It understands the nuances of medical terminology and the rigid boundaries of what can and cannot be legally stated in a promotional context. This ties directly into their distribution advantage. Absolute exclusive focus. They don't get distracted trying to build a CRM for an automotive company one day and a banking app the next.
They aren't trying to be all things to all industries, and our sources indicate that this singular focus is what secured them all top 20 global life sciences clients with minimal churn. Because when they walk into a meeting with a chief medical officer, they speak the language fluently.
Yes, that's huge.
But let's talk about the real defense, the widest part of the moat, which comes from their switching costs. The sources state that Indegene operates on a company-level engagement model, not a drug-level model.
Right. And to appreciate the depth of that moat, you have to look at how enterprise software is integrated. When Indegene deploys their enterprise commercial solutions, those digital tools don't just apply to one specific asthma inhaler the company sells.
It's not just a one-off campaign.
No, the tools cut across all brands, all products, and all therapeutic areas for that given client. They become the underlying infrastructure for the entire global portfolio.
I want to try an analogy here to make sense of the switching costs. If a pharma company hires a boutique marketing agency to run a campaign for a single drug, it's like hiring a plumber to fix a leaky faucet in your guest bathroom. If the plumber does a bad job, or if they charge too much, you fire them. You hire a different plumber to fix the next leak. It's an isolated problem. Yeah. But what Indegene does is totally different. They aren't fixing a faucet. They are ripping out the entire plumbing system of the house, laying down a new foundation, and routing all the water through a central AI pump. You don't just swap out Indegene without entirely disrupting your global regulatory and commercial infrastructure. You would have to tear the house down to the studs.
That analogy captures the operational reality perfectly. The pain and risk of switching vendors at that foundational level are simply too high for a risk-averse pharma company to entertain lightly. And this isolates Indegene from traditional technology giants.
Right, because you might wonder why a titan like Accenture or IBM doesn't just swoop in, throw $1 billion at the problem, and steal this market share. They have infinite resources. Why can't they build a competing NextXT platform?
Because traditional IT firms struggle in this space due to the nature of the sale. Indegene's work is fundamentally business-driven, not CIO or CTO-driven.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when a large enterprise software company wants to sell a cloud migration package, they pitch the chief information officer or the chief technology officer. They talk about server loads and data latency. But when Indegene sells its solutions, they aren't pitching the IT department.
Who are they talking to?
They are solving specific medical and regulatory problems for the chief medical officer, the head of commercial strategy, or the VP of global regulatory affairs.
They are talking about patient outcomes and FDA submission timelines, not server space.
Exactly. Traditional IT giants often lack that nuanced domain expertise. They don't speak the language of doctors, regulators, and clinical trial managers with the same native fluency. Indegene's moat is built on a quarter-century of domain expertise that you cannot simply replicate by hiring a few hundred software engineers.
So they have this deep moat, they speak the language, and they are sitting in a market with incredibly low penetration. But what pushes the clients to finally move faster? Because we established that pharma companies are inherently slow-moving and burdened by inertia. Even with the cost savings, they drag their feet.
They do.
Something external has to force their hand. And according to our sources, the entire industry is currently sitting in a pressure cooker. There are macroeconomic forces accelerating the need for Indegene's exact services.
Yes, there are three major catalysts creating this pressure right now. The first, and perhaps most immediate, is a regulatory catalyst. In July 2025, the U.S. administration passed legislation known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
And just to pause here for our listener, we are looking at this strictly from an operational and business perspective based on the sources provided.
Right.
We are simply examining the real-world ripple effects this specific legislation has on the pharmaceutical supply chain and corporate budgets.
Absolutely. Impartially speaking, the primary operational impact of this July 2025 Act is to put immense downward pressure on pharmaceutical companies to reduce the prices of their drugs for consumers. The mechanism forces price compression. Now, if a pharmaceutical giant is forced by federal law to lower the price of a drug they sell by, say, 20%, their profit margins instantly compress. To survive and maintain their earnings, they have to find ways to drastically reduce their internal operating costs.
And they can't easily cut research and development without destroying their future pipeline. If you stop inventing drugs, you die as a company. So where do they look?
They are forced to look directly at that 20 to 30% chunk of revenue they spend on sales and marketing. The legislation directly forces them to slash traditional marketing budgets and shift heavily toward highly efficient digital channels. They have to achieve the same commercial reach, but for a fraction of the historical cost.
Which plays right into Indegene's hands. They are standing there saying, remember a few years ago when we told you we could cut your marketing spend from 30% to 15%, and you said you needed more time to think about it? Well, now the legislation is telling you that you have no choice.
Exactly. It turns Indegene's service from a nice-to-have efficiency upgrade into a structural necessity for corporate survival. The slow inertia of the pharma companies is shattered by federal mandate. The second major catalyst is the looming 2028 patent cliffs.
I want to make sure we clearly define the mechanics of a patent cliff because it sounds dramatic and the numbers attached to it are staggering. My basic understanding is that when a pharma company invents a drug, they get a monopoly for a set number of years. When that clock runs out, chaos ensues.
That's the core of it. When a pharmaceutical company invents a new molecule and proves its efficacy, they are granted a patent. This gives them exclusivity to sell that drug without direct competition for a specific period, allowing them to recoup the billions spent on R&D.
Right.
But the clock is always ticking. When the patent eventually expires, it is referred to as a patent cliff, because the revenue generated by that specific drug literally falls off a cliff. The very next day, cheaper, generic versions of the exact same chemical compound flood the market at a fraction of the price.
And the numbers on this are huge.
They are. According to our sources, roughly $200 billion in global drug revenue is at risk of losing patent protection around the year 2028.
$200 billion suddenly exposed to generic competition. If you are a CEO relying on one of those blockbuster drugs for your quarterly earnings, that is a terrifying prospect.
It forces aggressive strategic shifts. When these major players lose exclusivity, two things have to happen simultaneously. First, they have to fiercely compete to retain whatever market share they can for the original brand name drug against the influx of cheap generics. They have to convince doctors and patients that brand loyalty matters.
And second,
Second, they have to aggressively launch new, innovative drugs from their pipeline to replace the lost revenue. Both of those actions, defending the old castle and conquering new territory, require hyper-efficient, highly targeted commercialization and marketing. They need to execute these campaigns faster than ever before, but with budgets that are constrained by the 2025 legislation.
so you have the July 2025 legislation squeezing profit margins from the top down, and the 2028 patent cliffs threatening to wipe out gigantic revenue streams from the bottom up. The pressure is coming from both sides. They have to do more, much faster, with significantly less money.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the third catalyst, which is internal to Indegene's own strategy. They are attempting to ascend the value chain. Historically, they've been focused on the execution side of things. They process the unstructured data, they send the digital marketing materials, they file the complex regulatory paperwork.
Yes, the heavy lifting.
But now, according to the sources, they are aiming to move into actual content creation and high-level strategy. They want to be the ones designing the messaging, not just delivering it. I have to admit, this is where I find myself a bit skeptical.
Why is that?
Well, can a company that is known worldwide for its flawless technical execution and back-end plumbing successfully pivot to being the creative brain and strategist for these pharma giants? Isn't that an entirely different skill set? You're moving from software engineering and data structuring to high-level medical marketing strategy and creative design.
It is a profound shift in their business model, and your skepticism is well placed. Execution is fundamentally about operational efficiency and eliminating errors. Strategy is about insight, psychology, and creativity. However, if we view this through the lens of those macro pressures, the logic becomes clear.
How so?
Strategy and content creation sit at a significantly higher margin tier than pure execution. Furthermore, because of the capabilities of their GenAI platform, they believe they can generate this highly specialized, compliant strategic content far faster and more accurately than a traditional Madison Avenue ad agency.
Now, the argument is that an AI trained on 25 years of medical data can write a better, more compliant brochure for an oncologist than a human copywriter at an external agency.
And can do it instantly. When you combine the margin squeeze of the 2025 bill and the urgency of the 2028 patent cliffs, these pharma companies are desperate for a unified partner. They don't have the time or the budget to hire an expensive strategy firm to design a campaign and then hand that campaign over to a separate tech firm like Indegene to execute it.
They just want one solution.
Right. Indegene is aiming to become the single end-to-end partner for the entire commercialization lifecycle.
Okay, we've talked extensively about the vast potential. We have a 9 lakh crores rupees total addressable market, a deeply entrenched technological moat, and enormous macroeconomic tailwinds pushing the industry right into their arms. The narrative is flawless. But how is this actually translating to the balance sheet right now? Let's follow the money and look at the hard numbers. Because a great story doesn't always equal a great business.
The financial profile of Indegene is quite unique, especially when compared to typical high-growth technology services companies. First and foremost, the company operates completely debt-free.
Which provides an incredible level of operational freedom. They aren't constantly worried about servicing interest payments in a fluctuating rate environment.
Right. They held an initial public offering in May 2024, raising 1842 crore rupees. Following that capital injection, they immediately paid off their outstanding debt, which stood at 934 million rupees.
Oh, wow. They just wiped it out.
Yep. Consequently, they are currently sitting on a very comfortable cash pile of about $200 million, which is roughly 954 million rupees. And their free cash flow generation has shown an exceptional trajectory, growing from 48 crore rupees in FY19 to a robust 400 crore rupees in FY25.
So they have a mountain of cash, absolutely zero debt, and they are generating significant free cash flow year over year. It sounds like an impenetrable fortress, but there is a glaring paradox hidden in their recent quarterly results that we need to dissect.
Q4 FY26.
Yes. When we look at the data for Q4 FY26, the sources show that their top-line revenue grew by a robust 32.8% year over year. That is fantastic growth for a company of this scale. Yet, in that exact same quarter, their net profit actually fell by roughly 32% year over year. How do you grow revenue by a third and simultaneously shrink your profit by a third? Where is the money leaking out?
This is where we have to look closely at the operating costs and the realities of aggressively scaling a specialized workforce. The profit drop wasn't a mystery. It was driven by a confluence of anticipated factors. First, you have standard operational inflations, wage hikes for their highly specialized workforce.
Right, you cannot pay bargain rates for software engineers who also understand global pharmacovigilance.
Exactly. You also have increased marketing costs as they aggressively try to capture that new revenue ahead of the patent cliffs. But the most crucial factor heavily impacting that specific quarter was a one-time M&A expense. Specifically, they absorbed the non-cash amortization of the biopharm deal, which accounted for 150 million rupees.
Let me try another analogy here to make sure I am visualizing this financial mechanism correctly. To me, this Q4 profit drop looks a lot like a homeowner deciding to buy an incredibly expensive, highly efficient solar panel system for their roof.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So the upfront closing costs, the installation fees, the permits, which are analogous to the M&A expenses and the amortization, they completely drain your checking account today. Your net profit for that specific month looks terrible. You are deeply in the red. But the asset you just acquired ensures long-term operational efficiency. Your monthly electricity bill will be near zero going forward. It's a short-term hit to the bottom line to secure the infrastructure for long-term compounding.
That is an excellent analogy. It perfectly highlights the difference between an accounting expense on a ledger and a structural flaw in the business. The amortization of 150 million rupees is a non-cash expense. It reduces the reported net profit on paper, but the underlying business engine is still generating robust free cash flow.
So they aren't actually losing the cash.
No, exactly. Management is highly aware of this dynamic and has guided that they expect adjusted EBITDA margins to stabilize at around 19 to 20% over the FY26 to FY27 period, as these one-time integration costs normalize and fade into the background.
And this brings up a concept mentioned in the sources regarding their operating leverage, which seems to be the true engine behind those future margin targets once the dust settles.
Right. Indegene's business model possesses incredibly high operating leverage. The initial development of their AI infrastructure and proprietary platforms, the NextX ecosystem, represents a colossal fixed cost. It takes a tremendous amount of capital and time to build and train that platform.
But once it's built,
But once it is built and functional, their personnel costs are largely variable, scaled based on specific project delivery. Therefore, every additional dollar of revenue they bring in through new enterprise contracts incurs very minimal marginal costs on the technology side.
that makes sense.
As the top line continues to grow, driven by the urgency of those patent cliffs and regulatory pressures, the bottom line will expand disproportionately because the foundational infrastructure is already paid for.
The sources also point out a detail about the valuation trajectory based on this leverage taking effect. Currently, their forward PE sits around 41, but it is expected to drop to 26 over the next 3 years as the amortization normalizes, and the true underlying earnings power of that operating leverage shines through.
Assuming, of course, that they execute according to plan and maintain their operational discipline. And speaking of execution, we should touch on the leadership guiding this ship. Manish Gupta has been the CEO since February 2000.
Wow, since 2000.
Yes, that is an incredibly long tenure in the fast-paced technology space, over 2.5 decades at the helm. Furthermore, the 5 original co-founders still collectively own approximately 26% of the company.
And the CEO's total compensation is listed at 36.54 million rupees, with an overwhelming 96.43% of that coming directly from his base salary. So you have a founding team with a quarter-century of shared history, holding a significant chunk of the equity, steering a completely debt-free ship. It paints a picture of extreme stability.
It provides a level of foundational stability that is rare in modern tech firms, but it also leads us directly into the vulnerabilities of the company because no company, no matter how strong its balance sheet or how unified its founders, is immune to gravity or external shocks.
Right. We have painted a very rosy, optimistic picture so far, detailing the TAM and the moats, but we need to look closely at the Achilles heel. What are the specific threats that could derail Indegene? Because growing at 32% in a highly specialized, intensely regulated sector attracts a unique set of challenges.
The most glaring vulnerability, one that stands out immediately in the financial data, is their client concentration. According to the sources, Indegene's top 10 customers contribute approximately 67% of their total revenue.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because having 67% of your revenue tied up in just 10 individual clients sounds absolutely terrifying to me.
It's definitely a concentration.
It is the classic case of having all your eggs in a very small number of very large bureaucratic baskets. Let's play out a worst case scenario. If a new CEO takes over at one of those top global pharma companies and they decide they want to consolidate their entire global IT spend with a single vendor like an IBM or an Accenture, regardless of the nuanced domain expertise, Indegene takes a devastating immediate hit to their top line. How does management sleep at night with that kind of extreme concentration risk hanging over them?
It is a severe risk, and your hypothetical scenario is a valid concern for any observer. However, you have to balance that fear with the operational reality of the switching costs we discussed earlier with the plumbing analogy.
Right, the pain of switching.
Exactly. Yes, the revenue is heavily concentrated in 10 clients, but the reported churn among those top clients is practically non-existent. The technological and operational integration is so deep, spanning across global regulatory filings and multi-brand marketing campaigns, that the institutional pain of leaving Indegene acts as a massive deterrent.
It's too hard to leave.
Right. But there's a nuance to this concentration risk that is perhaps more dangerous than a client simply choosing to leave for a competitor. It's a phenomenon we call pharma budget cyclicality.
Meaning the budgets of these clients aren't static, predictable numbers.
Far from it.
Yeah.
Even if a client absolutely loves Indegene, respects the AI platform, and has zero intention of switching vendors, their corporate spending is intimately tied to their own internal scientific success.
Oh, like if a drug fails.
Exactly. If a major client experiences a catastrophic failure in late-stage clinical trials for a drug they were banking on, or if their broader drug pipeline suddenly dries up, that company is forced to tighten its belt across the board. They may not fire Indegene, but they might drastically reduce the scope of their contracts, delay new software rollouts, or scale back on omnichannel marketing. So Indegene's revenue stability is somewhat tethered to the unpredictable, volatile nature of scientific research and drug efficacy.
That makes perfect sense. It's a cyclical risk tied to the underlying nature of the industry they serve. Even the best software can't fix a failed chemical compound. What about the regulatory and compliance side? We talked about pharmacovigilance earlier as a major strength. They use their NLP models to process vital drug safety reports, but isn't handling that kind of data also a colossal liability?
It is an enormous operational liability. They're handling life and death data on a global scale. If Indegene's AI model hallucinates or misses a critical adverse event report buried in a physician's note, or if there's a systemic processing error that delays a crucial safety submission to the FDA, the pharmaceutical client could face severe federal penalties, lawsuits, and public relations disasters.
Wow.
Yeah, a single high-profile compliance failure linked directly to Indegene software could instantly destroy the trust they have spent 25 years painstakingly building. In a highly regulated environment, reputation is quite literally everything, and the margin for error is essentially zero.
So we have severe client concentration, vulnerability to pharma budget cyclicality, and extreme regulatory risk. What about external competition? We mentioned earlier that traditional IT giants like IBM and Accenture struggle here because of the lack of medical domain expertise. But surely there are specialized competitors trying to carve out a piece of a 9 lakh crores rupees TAM.
There absolutely are. While Indegene claims there are no listed peers with their exact end-to-end operational model, there are formidable players operating in adjacent spaces. Companies like ZS, who possess immense strength in advanced analytics and consulting, and Axtria, who specialize in cloud data platforms for life sciences, are actively encroaching on this niche.
So they're coming at it from different angles.
Exactly. These competitors are constantly trying to expand their footprint from specific departmental solutions into broader enterprise platforms. Furthermore, the rapid advancement of generative AI means the technological landscape is shifting quickly. If a competitor develops a superior Gen AI tool specifically tuned for regulatory compliance, it could rapidly erode Indegene's current technological advantage.
And finally, we have to look closely at the leadership risk. We praised the CEO earlier for providing immense stability by being at the helm for 26 years, but that longevity is inherently a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is the textbook definition of key person risk. When a single founder has driven the strategic vision and managed the most critical client relationships for over 2.5 decades, the entire corporate culture and operational rhythm become deeply molded around their specific leadership style. Our sources note that there is no explicitly detailed public succession plan.
which is a bit concerning.
It is. If he were to exit unexpectedly, whether for personal reasons or otherwise, it could cause significant strategic uncertainty, potentially disrupt key client relationships, and rattle confidence in their ability to navigate the upcoming patent cliffs.
Though it is worth noting, on the purely operational risk side, the sources do point out one bright spot regarding their clients. The bad debts on their balance sheet are practically non-existent, only 0.507 crores rupees in FY22.
That's incredibly low.
Right, so they don't have an issue with counterparty credit. Their clients, being top 20 global pharma giants, always pay their bills on time. The risks we are discussing are entirely structural and execution-based rather than financial default risks.
The risks are generally low probability in terms of day-to-day occurrence, but they carry extremely high impact potential if they do materialize.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together. We've covered an immense amount of ground today. Indegene is this fascinating, deeply specialized, debt-free engine quietly running the commercial and regulatory operations of the global pharmaceutical industry. They're sitting on a staggering 9 lakh crores rupees total addressable market, and despite being a dominant player, they currently have less than a 4% penetration rate.
Yeah, they have an enormous runway of 96% unserved market share ahead of them, trapped behind the slow-moving inertia of pharma bureaucracy.
And they are fortified by a wide moat consisting of their proprietary AI technology, their exclusive focus on life sciences, and the incredibly high switching costs inherent in replacing core enterprise plumbing. Furthermore, they are being aggressively propelled forward by external macro forces. The July 2025 regulatory pressures forcing margin compression and the impending 2028 patent cliffs demanding hyper-efficient commercialization.
But, as we just debated, that journey to dominating the remaining 96% of the market is entirely dependent on flawless execution. They have to successfully navigate the short-term margin pressures of their M&A integration costs, maintain absolute perfection in regulatory compliance to avoid catastrophic penalties, and manage the precarious reality of having 67% of the revenue tied up in the budgets of just 10 huge clients.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We started this deep dive by asking you to visualize the pill in your medicine cabinet and the invisible journey it took to get there. As companies like Indegene successfully continue to replace the human element of pharmaceutical sales, clinical trial management, and safety monitoring with highly efficient invisible algorithms and AI models, it forces us to ask a profound question about the future of our medical system.
It really does shift the paradigm.
How does that technological shift change the fundamental nature of trust in healthcare? If the journey of a life-saving drug from the laboratory to your body is no longer guided by a network of human relationships, physician-to-physician interactions, and manual oversight, but is instead entirely optimized, directed, and monitored by an AI operating system, does the medicine itself change, or just the business of it?
It is a critical question to ponder. When pure operational efficiency and algorithmic precision replace the human touch in a field as deeply personal, complex, and high stakes as human health, the ripple effects on how we discover, prescribe, and trust our medicine are something we all need to be mindful of.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems operating invisibly behind everyday life, and we'll see you next time.